All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. We're going head first into something we all deal with, hard things.
Yeah, and not like, forgetting your keys or missing a deadline. Those are tough, sure, but we're talking capital H hard things.
Yeah.
We're looking at a talk called Lift Up Your Head and Rejoice,
Lift up your head and rejoice, given by M. Joseph Brough.
back in October of 2018.
And this isn't some boring lecture either.
Oh no,
Brough starts off with this story, a plane trip to Alaska gone wrong.
hilariously wrong.
It's the perfect way to set the stage for how to deal with those curveballs, and maybe even find some joy in it all.
But before we even get to Alaska, let's just pause for a sec. Anyone listening right now, I'm betting you've had your share of why me moments, right?
Oh, yeah.
What are some of those hard things that pop into your mind when we say that?
Keep those in mind because this deep dive is all about giving you the tools to not just survive those tough times, but to actually use them to grow.
And speaking of tools, let's go to Alaska. That story that Brough tells, it's like the perfect picture of how we react to challenges and how those reactions don't always help.
Right. Okay, so picture this. You're flying over Alaska. You're excited for this amazing adventure.
Absolutely.
And you want to keep things light for hiking, right? So you've got all your stuff, food, gear, everything packed into these boxes.
Yeah.
Attach streamers to them so you can see them, open the plane door, and toss them out into the wilderness.
Makes sense.
Seems like a good plan, except when you land, all ready to grab your gear, nothing.
Oh no.
No boxes, no supplies, just you and the Alaskan wilderness staring back at you.
That's rough.
Well, almost nothing. They did find one box.
Okay.
It had a tiny gas stove, a tarp, some candy, and a couple packs of hamburger helper.
No hamburger meat.
Nope. Talk about rubbing salt in the wound. Classic why me moment.
Totally get it. But Brough points something out, something really important. That question, it's natural, but it doesn't actually get us anywhere. We got to move past why me
Yeah.
and into, okay, now what?
Exactly.
That's where the real learning starts. Brough reminds us that these hard things, they're not some weird exception. They're part of the human experience.
Totally.
He gets real about it, too. Talks about those curveballs that can really knock you down. Death, divorce, illness, losing your job, faith trials.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is he doesn't just offer some empty words. He goes into the scriptures to show us how to handle these challenges.
For sure.
He brings up Nephi. Nephi was commanded by God to do some seriously hard things, like going back to Jerusalem to get those plates of brass from Laban.
Right.
His brothers were not happy. They even tied him up. They felt like he was putting their lives at risk.
Makes sense.
But that story, it shows something crucial. Sometimes those hard things we face come because we're trying to do what's right, even when people disagree.
It's tough.
It is. Think about your own life.
Yeah.
Have you ever gotten pushback for choosing what's right, even when it's difficult?
Yeah.
Then there's Joseph Smith in Liberty Jail,
Isolated.
suffering,
Yeah.
physically and emotionally. And that cry of his, "Oh God, where art thou?"
Powerful.
That really hits home for anyone who's ever felt abandoned or lost during those hard times. It shows that even the most faithful among us, we experience those dark nights of the soul.
We do.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Brough shares this powerful quote from Elder Neil A. Maxwell, who was battling leukemia.
Oh, wow.
He said, "I have given you leukemia that you might teach my people with authenticity."
Whoa.
That totally changes the why me question, doesn't it? It's not about being punished, but about how we can use our experiences to learn, grow, and help others.
Yeah. That changes everything. It really makes you think about your struggles not as obstacles, but as chances for something bigger.
It does, doesn't it? It leads right into the heart of Brough's message.
Which is,
We're not supposed to just get through the hard things.
we're supposed to.
Find meaning. Grow because of them.
Yeah, that's easier said than done, though.
Of course.
When you're in the middle of something really tough, it's hard to see the opportunity, let alone be excited about it.
Right. Well, Brough gives us 2 suggestions for how to deal with those rough times. And they might surprise you.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are they?
Forgiveness
Okay.
and giving ourselves over to a higher power.
Okay, forgiveness. I get why it's important, but honestly, it's got to be one of the hardest things to actually do, especially when the pain is still so raw.
Well, to really show this, Brough talks about this story of a stake president who had to forgive this lawyer.
Okay.
The lawyer was involved in a lawsuit that cost him his home.
Wow, that's serious.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to forgive someone when the consequences are that big?
That's exactly the point.
Look.
This story, it shows what forgiveness really is
Mm.
and what it isn't.
Okay.
It's not saying that what happened was okay,
Hmm.
but it's about letting go of the anger, the resentment, the stuff that can eat away at you.
So breaking free from that cycle of pain.
Exactly. It's about realizing that holding on to anger hurts you way more than it hurts the other person. And when you let go of that burden,
Yeah.
it creates a space for healing.
Healing. And then I see how forgiveness fits into the big picture. But what about giving ourselves over to a higher power? What's that actually look like in real life?
Okay, so picture this. Brough tells this story about this young woman who had to move to Guatemala.
Okay.
She didn't know the language, she had no friends, couldn't even go outside alone because it wasn't safe.
That's a huge change. I can only imagine wanting to give up.
She did struggle at first, but then she learned to not just deal with it, but to actually thrive.
Thrive. Wow.
And her experience, it shows us what surrendering really means. It's not about giving up on your goals, it's more like realizing that sometimes life throws things at you that you just can't control.
So instead of fighting those challenges or trying to force things, we just trust that there's a bigger plan.
Exactly. And that trust, that faith, it can actually give you strength and even joy, even when things are really hard.
It's like finding solid ground when everything else is shaking.
That's a great way to put it. And I know this might sound strange, but Brough really emphasizes that joy is still possible, even in the middle of those trials. He even uses examples from the scriptures.
Okay, like Lehi.
Lehi finding joy even though he lost everything. Alma being told to rejoice even when he was weighed down with sorrow.
So it's almost like choosing joy, choosing to see things differently.
You got it. And of course, there's the ultimate example, Christ.
Right.
He went through so much suffering, but with love and compassion. He showed us that even in the absolute darkest times.
There's still hope.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do we find that hope, that joy, when we're in the middle of our own struggles? Well, Brough suggests something pretty radical.
So we've talked about forgiveness, surrendering our will, and finding joy even when things are tough. But how do we actually do that when life feels like it's falling apart?
That's where Brough gets really down to earth. He says, it's not enough to just understand these things in our heads.
Right.
We got to actually live them out.
Yeah, it's like reading one of those self-help books. You get all fired up, but then never actually do anything.
Exactly. So let's take each of these ideas and see how we can actually make them part of our lives.
Okay, yeah.
Let's start with forgiveness.
Okay.
We talked about how it can be a process, right?
Yeah.
Especially when someone's really hurt us. What are some actual steps we can take to get there, to forgive?
I'm all ears.
Remember that story about the stake president forgiving the lawyer?
Yeah.
Brough really emphasizes that forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about letting go of those bad feelings that keep us stuck.
So it's not saying, oh, it's fine you did that, but more like freeing ourselves from the bitterness.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that might start with small things, like choosing to not dwell on the hurt, or telling ourselves to stop the negative self-talk. Maybe even saying something kind about the person, even if you don't feel like it at first.
Baby steps towards a bigger goal.
Exactly. And it might take time, but as we practice forgiveness, we start to heal. And that opens the door for joy.
Okay, that makes sense. What about surrendering our will? How do we do that when we're so used to being in control?
Think about that young woman who moved to Guatemala, right? She had to adapt to a whole new life, all these challenges she never saw coming.
Right, right.
Her story shows us that surrendering isn't about being passive or giving up on what we want.
So it's not about giving up on our dreams.
Not at all. It's about understanding that sometimes we're not in control. It's about aligning what we want with a bigger plan. Trusting that even when things feel shaky, there's a purpose to it all.
I like that, aligning what we want with a bigger plan. How do we do that practically?
Well, it could start with things like prayer, scripture study, making time to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
Maybe talking to a mentor or a spiritual leader, someone who can offer some wisdom and support.
Or even just paying attention to those little nudges inside, those feelings that guide us in the right direction.
Exactly. It's about learning to recognize that guiding force, even in the middle of everything else going on. And when we surrender, that's often when we find that deep peace. And that peace can bring a lot of joy.
That makes sense. And this brings us back to finding joy in the midst of hardship. Brough says it's not about ignoring the hard things, but choosing to focus on the good stuff.
He's right.
Yeah.
And that might look different for everyone. Maybe it's the simple things. Nature, music, spending time with people you love. Or maybe it's finding purpose in helping others, using your own experiences to help someone who's struggling.
It's about finding those sparks of joy and making them part of our lives, especially when things are hard.
You got it. And remember, joy isn't about being happy all the time. It's about having that deep peace, that hope that comes from knowing we're not alone, we're loved, and we have a purpose.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a question for you to think about. What's one hard thing you're going through right now?
Think about that for a minute.
And how can you use these ideas, forgiveness, surrendering, and seeking joy to get through it?
You're not alone in this journey, remember that.
Yeah.
We all face these challenges.
But we have the power to choose how we respond.
That's right.
And by using what we've talked about today, by practicing forgiveness, surrendering to something bigger than ourselves, and actively looking for joy even when things are hard,
Even then,
we can not only survive, but we can thrive and become even stronger.